Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. All right, journalist Dave Gray Donald from The Grind TO, he's back in the studio with us to unpack his latest piece. It's a doozy. I imagine it took quite some work to put together, some exhausting work. We're going to talk to Dave about that. And if you remember, Dave was on earlier in the summer. We had a live stream on managing the narrative. And you'll find some similarities in this conversation from that one. But near the end of the episode, we're going to talk about what we can do to combat what Dave's going to be talking about here. Dave's article came out this morning, and we'll link it in the show notes as we always do. It centers on the failures of Canadian media surrounding the events of October 7th and their absolute refusal to correct or change course. Dave, first, welcome back. Thanks for taking time for us again. How are you?
Hello, good to be here. Yeah, I've been busy, but lovely to be here.
You're distributing the latest episode of The Grind right now, as well as, I imagine, talking to people about this latest article.
Yeah, for sure.
For those who haven't read the article yet, can you give us just kind of a brief summary of what you mean when they refuse to correct October 7th falsehoods? Because I think all of us have heard the falsehoods and we've tried our best to combat those narratives, but you've really done a deep dive into not only uncovering them, but pressing Canadian media to correct themselves. How did that go?
So, yeah, there's a lot of verified information about what happened on October 7th. It's clear there were attacks and gunfights and all sorts of things happened. A lot of people were killed. So this is not denying at all October 7th, but specifically this article looks at the claim of 40 killed babies and beheaded babies and the claim of 40 beheaded babies. This spread like wildfire starting on October 10th, 2023. There was an Israeli TV interview where someone said that the reporter on I-24 News said soldiers found 40 dead babies in Kfar Aza, a kibbutz in southern Israel. And it turned out there were 0 babies killed in that kibbutz. The youngest person killed there was about 14 years old. However, this rumor spread all over the world, as I'm sure almost all of your listeners remember, and it was repeated in Canadian media very quickly. So that day, the National Post had a headline about 40 dead babies. Columnists were posting about it. The Toronto Star had an article in the opinion section. And then relatively quickly, and of course Joe Biden said he saw photos of decapitated children, and the White House immediately said, no, he hasn't seen those photos. We haven't seen those photos. And the Israeli government was not confirming the 40 dead babies or the 40 beheaded babies, but still it kept spreading, and there were reports coming out that it wasn't verified. And so the National Post, Post media papers in general, published at least 4 times this claim. That was mostly in October and November. I've emailed them, the editors, the editor-in-chief and the managing editor there 5 times, and they have not responded. They're not correcting their reporting. So readers of Post media papers might still believe that there were 40 murdered babies in that kibbutz on October 7th. Now, the reason that this is important is, aside from just the truth, which I think is always important, is that if you'll remember, this claim was used very widely to shut down anytime a person wanted to talk about context of October 7th, anytime anyone wanted to talk about what was happening and a proportional response. Because Israel started bombing I can't remember if it was the 7th or the 8th of October, started bombing Gaza and relentlessly. A big part of the article goes into these claims in an article published by Global News, a journalist named Stuart Bell. He's an award-winning veteran reporter, covers terrorism. And he went to kibbutz Be'eri, a different kibbutz that had been attacked. About 100 people died there. 100 Israelis died there, and many Hamas fighters. And he interviewed people who had lost relatives. He interviewed, one of the main people he interviewed was an Israeli colonel, Golan Vach. I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name, I apologize. And the colonel made a number of unsubstantiated and false claims. And there has been no follow-up evidence from the Israeli government or media sources. And Stuart Bell mentions early in the article that he was shown photos to back up this colonel's account of events. Now, at no point when he's talking about the beheaded baby does he say that the colonel could not show him a photo. The colonel had told other media that there were no photos. This is not noted by Bell, but it's his responsibility as a journalist, including within Global's journalistic practices, to be transparent about what information he can verify and not, especially with such sensitive, highly sensational claims. There's other false claims, or there are false claims in his article. The colonel says at a different house that 8 children were concentrated with adults, 7 adults, and concentrated in a room and burned together. Now, there was no house in Be'eri where 8 children were burned together. And the house, he also mentions, standing outside of it, that the Israeli military had shot a tank shell at this house when he's explaining, because another reporter asked, how is this house so damaged? And Vach says it was shot with a tank. Bell does not include this. There's been a lengthy investigation both within Israel and beyond, about what happened in this kibbutz and how there was a house, the Pessi Cohen house, that was fired on several times by Israeli tanks while about 15 hostages were inside. The Israeli military admits that one hostage outside was killed with shrapnel from its own tank. It won't conclude on how the other people were killed. There was an Israeli Yasmin Porat, who gave an interview a few days later saying there was a lot of crossfire and people were caught in the crossfire. So Bell does not include this in his Global News article. To get to the end of this story, I've emailed Bell and the editor-in-chief at Global News, Sonia Verma, and they did not respond. Someone from the communications department at the parent company, Chorus Entertainment, responded to all of my requests saying, we stand by our reporting, we will not be changing our story at this time. One last detail here is that I was at an event on October 19th. So this article was posted on October 15th, 2023. And then 4 days later, there was this event called Trust Talks. It was turned into an episode of CBC Ideas. You can listen to it. It was broadcast on November 8th, 2023. And the panelists were Sonia Verma from Global News, Brody Fenlon from very high up at CBC News, and I'm forgetting the name of the person at the Toronto Star. And someone asked a question there about this article by Stuart Bell, saying, all of you on stage, your articles have included claims of beheaded babies, and often in quotes. So you're quoting from someone who's making the claim. And you're not saying that the claim is unverified. So publishing such a sensational claim, normally, first of all, you would think to not publish it in the first place if it's so sensational and can't be verified. And then in the second place, if you are going to publish it, the responsible thing to do is to say that we, Global News, CBC, Toronto Star, etc., cannot verify this claim. They did not do that in the Stuart Bell October 15th article. Of course, the National Post was not doing it. There was a Toronto Star op-ed, I think I mentioned already, that mentioned the 40 beheaded babies, and it didn't have an attribution. They changed it, I believe, on October 19th, but there was still a 40 babies claim in that article that wasn't changed until I emailed them in August 2024.
When they make those changes, do they do so publicly at all, or is it simply just a line change in the printed article or in the online article?
So that's a great question. The Toronto Star is one of the only ones that from my correspondence there was a correction, and in that case, they'd already corrected something on last October, and they put it. So they changed the article text, and then at the very bottom in italics they say,
Okay.
we couldn't substantiate this, and they did that again. And I looked because they publish corrections each day. And I looked in their corrections those 2 days and I didn't see a notice. So maybe I missed it, but I don't think they put a notice in their print edition. I'd love to have someone check on that. But they do it very quietly often. But I was I was a little bit heartened, I'll be honest, that the Toronto Star at least would issue that correction on the article. But that is just an indication that, expectations are on the floor, because they shouldn't have published that in the first place.
And I think it's been widely known that those claims have had issues around them, if not been proven to be complete falsehoods for quite some time. I mean, you're talking about people questioning them, pressing them on October 19th. And then months and months and months later, being pestered by their fellow journalists here in Canada, and then they're issuing a really innocuous correction. Let's just couch the fact that the other folks you contacted just still stand by it and how ridiculous that is. It seems like these corrections aren't really corrections at all. And this isn't like they spelled someone's name wrong or they got a small detail wrong. I mean, this is big. This is not to say that October 7th isn't a date to be discussed and analyzed and on its own without any of these claims, but the way politicians have been able to weaponize it continually to this day, like there's some politicians still really repeating these claims and they know. And so you would think that finding out they're unsubstantiated, or perhaps even lies perpetuated on purpose for a very specific end, is news in itself. Well, I know it's news because you wrote about it and we're here to talk about it. But I mean, like, you're in these editing rooms and en masse, like Legacy Media finds out that they've been duped, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And they have nothing really to say about that at all. That's the most damning thing about it.
Yeah, I should say that at the that event in Toronto, the Trust Talks, so the editor-in-chief at Global News, Sonia Verma, said, I need to see the example, and then I read every night the Global News articles and the scripts, and I go through it all, and I know what we can verify and what we can't, and make sure that we are upfront about what we can verify and what we can't. And this one,
that's a lie.
I don't know what's going on inside the newsroom at Global News. If anyone from Global News is listening, get in touch with me, because I would love to know what is going on inside this newsroom that this article won't be corrected. Same goes with Post Media. Let me know. But to understand a little bit what's going on there is I should give one little shout out to CBC first, because Brodie Fenlon at CBC, who's now the general manager and editor-in-chief at CBC News, he got promoted in January, he responded saying roughly the same thing, that we want to be really upfront about what we can verify and what we can't, and give context and explain and whatever. Now, there are only two articles on CBC News website that I can find that talk about beheaded babies. I only really looked at new printed or sort of online text media. I didn't go through radio. I didn't go through TV.
Dave, I don't even know how you went through all the print.
I mean, just searching keywords. So I might have missed something. But on CBC News, there's two articles that quote from Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, because they were attacking the CBC, the Conservatives were, because they weren't using the word terrorist to define Hamas. Or I can't remember exactly what the argument was, but it was something like that. And so Rachel Thomas at Parliament had said, what side are you on? How could you possibly be on this side when there's 40 babies beheaded? And so John Paul Tasker, senior reporter at CBC, quoted that, and in the first article on October 17th, did not say anything about how this was unsubstantiated. There were widespread reports that it was unsubstantiated at the time, just didn't include it. So a reader could reasonably think that it was true. But a week later did a follow-up article on the same topic and included, this claim cannot be verified or it's not been corroborated. So that's good. That's progress, at least. I take issue with it being printed in the first place, but the CBC News Online did sort of correct their record. However, that first article from October 17th, I got in touch with them actually just yesterday, with the journalist, John Paul Tasker, and I said, will you issue a correction or a clarification like you did in the other article? Because this one still looks like it's telling a truth.
You gave him one last out.
Yeah, and I was forwarded on to the head of public affairs for CBC, Chuck Thompson, and he just said, this quote was attributed properly, no change necessary. And I said, seriously? I gave him some more time, and no response. I've filed a complaint now with the ombudsman at CBC because they do have an ombudsman, unlike Global. And we'll see what happens there, but the article is uncorrected. So CBC did also fail in that regard.
And that's our public broadcaster.
Well, the other person interviewed in the article, and you should really read the article, everyone who's listening. I don't want to give away everything, but it is very long, so I'm trying to summarize for you. Is that I spoke to journalism professor Sonia Fata at Toronto Metropolitan in Toronto. And Sonia was talking about, how this story, there's a huge responsibility for media because it's so charged, because it's such a sensational claim, all the reasons you can imagine. Journalists should be really, really careful about anything that looks like disinformation or misinformation. Disinformation is when a source is specifically trying to mislead and it's disseminated in a way that's meant to mislead. Often media take disinformation and then unwittingly spread it, and that's called misinformation, when you have a incorrect fact and you're spreading it without knowing. I have no idea whether these journalists and editors are unwittingly or wittingly do it. I can't judge on that. However, she says, in the case of Russian disinformation, when media hears that, they're very, very careful, very scrutinizing, really sharp on not trusting a word that comes from Russian government sources. This case, the colonel in Berry was just trusted at his word.
You know what really upsets me, and I get it, we don't know what they knew. We don't know what pressures they were under to print what. And we can give them all the benefit of the doubt in the fucking world. But here's where I'm going to lose my shit. We have seen collective retribution from Israel time and time again, right? Prior to October 7th, 2023. Many, 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 many times. Carpet bombing of densely populated areas in retribution for legitimate armed violence against an occupation. Okay, but even if you want to frame it as Israel does, rockets would be fired into civilian territory and perhaps kill or damage or whatnot from Palestine, from Gaza. Hamas would take credit, and Israel would then again just wipe out apartment blocks. CBC has reported on this. Global News has reported on this. All of these people have seen this. So it wasn't just a sensational claim. It was used to justify a fucking genocide. And they may not have anticipated the genocide, but they absolutely knew in that moment. We all knew on October 7th when we saw what we saw. We all knew it was important to remind people that it didn't start then because we knew what the response would be. And every journalist had to have known what would happen if they printed those claims and repeated those claims without verifying them and fed into that fever in that moment. They had to have known women, children, and families would die en masse. We all knew. So all those pressures they were under, they didn't care. And then even as it started to unfold and the language of the Zionist state was repeated and it was genocidal, still they felt no responsibility to pull that back. And it's still used. It's still used. It even still sits in the minds of people who aren't as informed, who don't have the time to seek out genuine media sources. Because I can't even tell the difference. I'm trying to talk to Santiago about the rules of journalism, and you kind of, you talked about there being an ombudsman for CBC, and we know there's libel if you say something about somebody. Hamas isn't going to start suing all of these outlets or whoever has been defamed or whatnot. And there's just no legal recourse for these people who are complicit in what we've seen unfold. Like, I hold them partly responsible. I don't care about the pressures that they're in the newsroom. There is huge impact. It's not just like you misled people into believing a policy, some transit policy or whatnot. Like this was complicity in genocide now. And so even when you go back to them and you are pleading with them, it sounds like you're like pleading with your colleagues, like, look, bud, I will give you all the time in the world, but you've got to make this right. And they're just like, no.
Yeah, it's been obviously brutal to watch. And yeah, just to give some rough numbers, there were depending how you count, there's 1 or 2 babies and 2 toddlers who were killed on October 7th. And, there's 710 babies as of the end of August who were killed in Gaza. That's people under the age of 12 months. It boggles the mind. And yeah, so another aspect in the article that I was looking at was, why does this happen? And there's a couple answers. One is general and one is specific. The general one is about Canadian foreign policy and how often journalists, this is across any country, journalists from a country come with all of our own cultural baggage. And so when we go to a place, we have all of these ideas already, and the journalists who often get selected to be foreign correspondents they often have the interests of the Canadian state in mind. And so the reporting on our allies tends to be a lot less critical than reporting on our enemies. That's the general thing that comes from, upbringing, the public education system, culture, Hollywood, other media, colleagues, editors, owners, all of that sort of stuff.
Because our allies are as clearly defined as our quote unquote enemies, right? Like we've been in the Middle East.
Right. So yeah, so when you have all of the Canadian politicians of the major parties, specifically the Liberals and the Conservatives, steadfastly in step with Israel and the U.S., then those are our allies there, and Palestinians and their representation are the sworn enemy. The other specific thing that I can note is that Post Media and Global News were, up until about 2009, owned by the same company. It was called CanWest Global. Some of you might remember it. And CanWest Global had a openly very Zionist, pro-Israel editorial position. So the head office in Winnipeg would edit or shoot down opinion writing that was critical of Israel. And that's when the post-media papers the Sun papers weren't owned, but the Ottawa Citizen, Vancouver Sun, National Post, etc. were all owned by the same company. And this year, the National Post editor-in-chief said, I'm very proud to be editing a publication that is Zionist in its commentary or opinion or
Is that
whatever.
like an almost quote? Like,
It's a real quote. It's at the end of the article. It's the second last paragraph. And Global News and its new parent company, Chorus Entertainment, it was owned by Shaw for a little bit. Now it's at Chorus. They wouldn't respond to that question of whether it still holds a sort of pro-Israel editorial position.
well, we don't need them to answer. You've proven it. Before we started recording, I asked you how you were. You said you were fine at the beginning of the episode. But the truth is, this not only was it clearly a lot of work. I mean, you talk about reading through and then checking back on a lot of content and reaching out over and over again. These are, I don't know if you want to call them that, like your colleagues. You are a journalist. You speak often of the value of truth. I mean, like, I imagine that drives you, obviously, to some extent. How has it been seeing the media respond in this way?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously rough. Hard article to write, but, I've been meaning to write this one for so long, really since October last year. Took a long time for whatever reasons. I really wanted to be meticulous about it all. But yeah, it's hard seeing... I've never worked in like one of the big corporate newsrooms, so I don't really consider myself colleagues with some of these reporters
Okay.
and editors. But yeah, just seeing that they're the ones with the big audience and the prestige and winning awards and making living wage salaries. A lot of people have been laid off at Global News, and Stuart Bell is not one of them. And so seeing all this is really demoralizing. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as watching, actually what's happening. And, I don't have family there, so I don't have that immediate connection that a lot of people do. I do have friends with family there. But yeah, it's been rough. And I think it's it's a sign that there've been a number of signs in Canada that media is not staying on top of being credible and big corporate media. I mean, we've seen it more in the U.S., but I think there's something to be said in Canada. A lot of people, I would imagine, don't take post media very seriously. However, seeing the report from Global was a wake up call as well for me, because I hadn't considered Global in this way before. I didn't look at radio, but Emma Paling, another excellent journalist, not that I'm excellent, but an excellent journalist, Emma Paling, did a great article on Global News and also some Bell Media radio that had unverified claims. So the Alex Pearson show, which is a Global show, had the beheaded babies claim a number of times, and they still have those episodes up, I believe, uncorrected.
I don't imagine Canadian media is especially unique in terms of Western coverage of what's happening either. Like, I know it's not your job to have monitored the UK, EU, or United States media, but
Yeah, the thing I'll say is that there's a lot of this stuff was reported in Israeli media.
corrected in Israeli media. Do you mean that? Yes.
Yeah, it was corrected in Israeli media, but not Canadian media. And I will say, I'll be totally honest. I've been very nervous to publish about this, and because being the first one is tough. You see the house that the Israeli tanks shot at with hostages in it. It's been reported by Haaretz in Israel, recently by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. No one, I don't think anyone in Canada has published about it. I don't think any major Canadian source has done a sort of big look at the 40 beheaded babies claim and debunking it. I just don't think any Canadian media has done it. So that's, very strange. and nerve-wracking to speak against when there's such a consensus. And that's what happened back last fall, was there's such a consensus, especially it comes from the comment section, the opinion section of papers, but it also does start from reporting. There was such a consensus, it was really hard to say anything. And then, now I reply to some people on Twitter, and I say, this Post Media, they still have articles up, or they're repeating the beheaded babies claim. And people are like, no, they didn't do that. We all know that was like false. These are, supporters of Israel. And I'm saying, no, how do you forget this? The articles are still up. This was the whole thing. This was the whole thing last fall.
That there has been a little bit of that's gone on this past almost year, where it's just like you're in disbelief of people's inability to hold a point, like it's just this global amnesia or whatnot. But
yeah, it's also I should note there's a few politicians. So obviously Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, he still tells a story like at the U.S. Congress in July. He told a story of 2 babies in an attic who were killed, and that never happened. And the other one is Conservative MP Melissa Lantsman in March gave a speech where she talked about Hamas burning babies in ovens, and there's no evidence of that.
Was she wearing her IDF dog tag at the time?
I don't know. I didn't see the photo.
I imagine she was. All right, so the show's called Blueprints of Disruption. So let's talk about how we can disrupt this shit, right? What we can do to combat the failures of Canadian media and the impacts that it has. So I agree. Like I called Santiago, and this is relevant. The reason I had to call Santiago and talk to him about this for a while and why he couldn't be here. And what Dave said earlier, livable wage, like independent media generally doesn't pay livable wages. I mean, personally for Santiago and I, it doesn't pay anything at all. And so he has to pay the bills. He's working. He can't do the good journalism that he would like to do right now because he has got to put food on his table and pay rent. And independent Canadian media is not unique. I mean, there's maybe a few people that are able to do that, but generally it is, and I don't mean this as a pun, it's a grind. It's a real grind. And like, how we all feel. We're never doing enough to stop this, Dave's never going to be feeling like he's doing enough to correct the wrongs of Canadian media. None of us are going to feel like we've ever done enough to stop the genocide and the escalation that's happening now in Lebanon or the world's woes, right? All on our own. But there is a lot I think we can do in terms of supporting and promoting independent media sources in order to combat this. I think it is critical because, like Dave said, those other platforms have such huge reach. Now, if we could find a way to get the grind and this article as much reach as those other things, the impacts wouldn't be so great. But there's just such a lopsided delivery of information. And it's really hard for people right now to find genuine media sources that they can trust.
Yeah. I don't envy readers. I mean, one positive thing I can point people to is there's a new site that aggregates a lot of indie media called unrigged.ca. unrigged.ca. And it's semi-curated, so that's pretty good, but we don't have anything on the scale of a Post Media. I was looking at their financials yesterday, and they still have annual revenues of like $177 million. They lose millions of dollars every year, but they're still able to pay off some loans, or their loan sharks or whatever. But yeah, to the point you're making, yeah, there's so many stories that we can't do, and I'm trained as a environmental writer. I wrote a book on climate justice. I was just so blown away and shocked and appalled by what was happening, and this has become my beat. Hopefully not forever. Hopefully we get out of this. But yeah, there's a lot of stories that I'm kicking myself that I just haven't had the time to do. I'm sure there's shows that you wish you could do. And yeah, there's a couple things I want to mention. Money is obviously number one. Donate to the media sources that you want to see more of in the world, and so that they don't disappear. There's been a ton of indie papers and online publications that have disappeared over the years, and it's because people need money and get burned out and have to take paying jobs at other places that have money. The second thing is there's a culture that used to exist that doesn't as much anymore, and it's around how people who are involved in movements used to write more and used to write more articles. Now it's a lot of Instagram writing and Twitter and stuff. But when it comes to writing articles, whether it's report backs from protests, whether it's analysis of something, it's all on Instagram, but it's not on web pages. And that makes it very hard to search for. It makes it hard to know where to look. And so, I'll take an example of another story, the story you actually emailed me about first, which was about a protest where someone was arrested in Toronto in September 6th or 11th, I think maybe. And then they went to 51 Division or 52, 51, and then police pushed people onto the street and pepper sprayed them and beat them and tackled people and made a bunch of arrests, all for assaulting an officer.
Folks were put in the hospital that day.
Yeah, there were a number of concussions, torn MCL, knee ligament, and minor injuries on the police side, is what they say. So no major media did an article about what had happened out front of 51 Division. And then what I did was literally just put things in chronological order based on interviewing people who were there and finding videos online and people sending me videos, and literally just put the sequence of events in chronological order and make it make sense. And reporting in a lot of ways is not that complex. There's some stories that are, but a lot of it is really just, can I verify that this actually happened? How do I know or not know? Let me put it in an order that makes sense. And I think a lot of people are intimidated with writing. I know it's not for everyone, but I do encourage more people to write articles, honestly.
I'm giving you this face just because I'm in the middle of trying to build a website so that we could do just that, like find another medium. And both Santiago and I like to write, but want an outlet for it, and we want to tell the story of movements on the ground. And so that smirk that I have is like you reaffirming that there's a bit of a vacuum there. We interviewed Unicorn Riot not that long ago, and they're based in the US, but they do have contributors from around the globe, and they help tell the stories on the ground of movements and protests and the state's response, not just theoretically or in policy, but how it's actually playing out against protesters and what that means for quote unquote democracy. So I definitely understand what you're talking about there, because if there's so much misrepresentation of protests right now in general, and there's really not much to combat that. So,
and I'll say, putting videos online, whatever social media platform it is fine and good. The thing that is searchable on the internet is text. So if you want to say, search for what happened on this date at this place, you could caption something really well on Instagram and people might be able to find it, but it's much harder that way. So I think there's another role that I something I want to do more is help provide and train people on various skills in journalism. There are some, skills that are to be learned, but for the most part, it is really just verifying what happened. I mean, a lot of journalism school is about the craft, but really what it comes down to is like fact checking, verifying, and yeah, and then there's the things of how to put together a good, interesting story.
Maybe you could have a little workshop for the folks at Post Media, Global News. Maybe we could sign them all up. Santiago just went through journalism school, and we had all these discussions, and he talks about, the rules that his professors are teaching and the standards some of his stories are held to, and they're always a higher standard than what he's witnessing in legacy media. And I didn't go through journalism school, and so I'm hearing all of these, and I'm thinking like there's like this checklist, these set of rules. But then I'm on the phone with him today, and he's like, well, it's kind of like, what is that, Pirates of the Caribbean. They're like guidelines. They're these unwritten rules. And there's really no mechanism to hold them responsible. And the idea of trying to get the state to hold news, that's just a big puddle of mud. We don't want to go there. So sure, some folks might want to take up journalism or some form of it. But let's say they don't have capacity for that. Is there anything a reader should be doing when they see this or to combat this other than finding a better media source and supporting them and sharing with all of their friends so that they don't also have to just consume global news? Should they be writing the editor? Should they be pushing back in this way? Is there a way for us to correct legacy media, to change this kind of trend? That maybe it's not a trend because I haven't studied media for a very long time, but it just seems like since October 7th, and I hate using that as a time frame, but it's inevitable in discussion now. I don't know. I feel like it's next level. So how can we push back against this?
Yeah, I would look to organizers of various movements for this, and, you have a lot of experience. I'll just add that writing to the editors and the journalists is important on both sides of things. So if there's a problem at CBC, let's say, email the ombudsman. The ombudsman does usually look into things in a somewhat thorough way. They dismiss a lot of complaints that I think are valid, but they do actually respond, and I believe they make their responses public. And so that is at least one mechanism, and they do have to do an investigation. And on the other side, the thing I've heard in newsrooms is they want people who work in these newsrooms also want to hear positive reinforcement when they get it right. So, for example...
Well, it works with dogs and kids.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to think of an example, but let's say there's a story that's well reported, and then honestreporting.ca, which is a very pro-Israel media advocacy organization, they go on the offensive and they say this article is biased against Israel. If it's good reporting, then get in touch with the journalist, with the editor, and say, this article was excellent. And there are a few organizations that are doing campaigns when there's really bad reporting. So the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East is one of the few that does sort of mail the... You can sort of use a web form to email...
en masse, yeah.
Yeah, en masse. And they identify and do the research for you, but you can add what you want to say. But I think a personal email is really powerful. And yeah, even calling out... the other thing that I think a lot of people should do is sometimes get out of your bubble and see what is being published. Changing from the following to the For You tab on Twitter is night and day.
No, that's where Brian Lilly lives.
Yeah. So, but you're going to see, like right now what's happening there is they're really going on the offensive against the Toronto District School Board and teachers for this, for telling kids to wear blue, which is happening for years at the Grassy Narrows River Run in Toronto. People are losing their minds, and it's happening from Greg Brady at Global and Brian Passiflume, or however you pronounce it, at The Sun, and Jesse Brown's on it. And
Oh no.
but you don't see these things until very late in the game if you're staying in your bubble. So being able to see what's happening, see people who are misconstruing things early on, and speaking back to it, I think is important. Instagram is maybe the worst for this, because you can really be in your own bubble and never see anything on Instagram. So read, go to the front page, go to the opinion section of the Star, the Globe. It's really hard to look at the post, but sometimes do it.
This is not self-care you're advocating
and
for.
engage. No, it's not. But be careful. Be careful, especially with the post.
Don't read the comments. Don't read the comments if you have to go there. Promise me, people, you won't read the comments.
But the other thing is, we, like Jessa, you, and I know Scott Martin is about to launch a podcast as well. We've lost a lot of the media criticism capacity in this country. You really don't see coverage of, for example, the article that I just did. You wouldn't see that on Canada Land anymore. You might have seen it a year ago, but things are different now. And so there isn't really a media criticism website right now. There's not an outlet in Canada that does that. So I think it's important to support the places that do it. The Breach is doing a lot. The Grind is doing a lot. The Maple, yeah. So yeah, those are important things.
I very much appreciate you coming on, Dave, and sharing your time. I know you folks are just in the middle of it, getting another issue out to print. We absolutely love the Grind. Santiago, again, I told him I would represent today because he couldn't be here. He was just like, if they could just have big ads in every subway stop, if we could support them enough, they could have 2 issues a month. I mean, whenever he sees it go out, they're always gone. Like, you got to get your copy or you're going to miss it. Like, people want it. It is good stuff. Like, it gets consumed. So if you're out there and you can support these people, please do, as well as all the other great people that Dave mentioned. But, I got really upset when I was talking to you before, and we said, if it doesn't get that reach, like, what is the value? How do we, if we're not really changing the narrative with what we're doing? And you talked about, like, recording history, and I just, like, I started crying when I was thinking about that today, because I was like, no, God damn it, I am not here to record history. Fine, you can watch my stuff 20 years from now and think what you want, and sure, I understand the value of that and the importance of documenting war crimes and all of that, but no fucking way am I living for then, right now. Like, it's not enough in this moment of rage and seeing what we're seeing. So
yeah, there's the new documentary, No Other Land, it's about the West Bank. It showed at TIFF, a North American premiere. It's about 2019 to 2023, and these homes being demolished in the West Bank again and again and again by the Israeli military. And the main focus, I'm forgetting his name, but he says something, because there's another journalist there, an Israeli journalist, who's really like, I'm going to publish an article and everything's going to change. And this Palestinian guy is like, you're not going to end the occupation in 10 days. It's a slow process. Just getting the truth out there is a slow process. And yeah, I don't think, honestly, this article might go somewhere. I don't think it'll be that big, that fast. Honestly, I think it'll be, it's for the next time that something happens, but even then, it's just, we're on a perpetual cycle. I honestly don't know how we get off it, but I am heartened by the growth of a number of media outlets that's happening. I totally understand your frustration, but also it is just a process. I think a lot of people right now are watching what's happening in Lebanon, and they're like, oh, it's these same claims again. And people are seeing through it a lot better that it's, these claims aren't made in good faith. Now, that's not changing what's happening in Lebanon. It is, however, what is possible to do in terms of educating people here. But I think there's a lot of people who are just willing to turn their attention away and not look. They're not that interested in the truth, or they've been trained to not really question.
I don't think those people are listening to this show, though. But in terms of Lebanon, folks, start writing to the CBC ombudsman, because they are just regurgitating Israeli talking points again, over and over again in their headlines, targeting Hezbollah, warning civilians. I mean, they're just helping to legitimize all of it. So pushback there would be appreciated.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me on. Always a pleasure. And yeah.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, support the grind, please. We need money.
Keep up your good work, comrade.
Thanks so much.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.